Hello and welcome to TPR Tricks and Tips video number 2. I'm Esther and I'm with English Gang. Today we're going to discuss the Tigers module. So before we start, why use the TPR method for older students? Well, the total physical response helps students to focus, especially if after a long day at work or studying for exams. This really helps to keep the energy high and for them to have also enjoy the lesson. The second part is to reduce stress. Now, this stress is different for each student. For some, movement can be a very helpful tool to let go of the day's stress and really to focus. For other students, it will actually cause stress because they might feel shy or they might feel put on the spot. So it's very important to read your student and see where they're at. Whenever they feel uncomfortable, rather feel free to try another TPR method or to even try a different strategy. And then lastly, also a big motivator for why we use this is because physical movement is very beneficial for memory, and it also helps students to retain a lot of information according to language. So next up are my top 3 tips or ideas for the Tigers module. The first one, test understanding by actions. So this is a kind of adaptation of Simon Says, which really helps to figure out if they're understanding the words. So a nice way to do this would be to say, can you explain to me or act out what does sing mean? Or what does teach mean? In that way, that's a nice tip to use. Number 2 would be to use one-word stories, or more for a more advanced students, use one-sentence stories. So this is a nice game to use as a cooler at the end of the lesson. If you have some extra time, you can use some of the words in the lesson and say, for example, can you give me one word to start a story? For example, once upon a time. And then I would say, there was a king. And so it's kind of like a back and forth storytelling. And you can even throw some of the words that was used in the beginning, those verbs that I'll show you just now. That's a great way to just practice them one more time. And then the last one would be to write down story prompts. So encourage your student to bring a piece of paper to the lesson, maybe before the lesson starts, and ask them to write down a name of a man, or a male name, female name, a place name, and then start a story by using those prompts. So for example, the man's name would be John, and what does John say? What does Susan say? Where did they meet? So that's just a nice way to also, one more time, just go over the vocabulary and also make sure that they understand some of the words that was dealt in this lesson. So let's get into it, the Tigers module. So I'm going to do a mock lesson for you now, and just talk as I would talk to a student when I do this lesson. So I hope you enjoy it. The Tigers module. In this lesson, we're going to focus on the present perfect tense using regular verbs, and our theme for today is money. Lesson goals. I would usually ask the student to read the goals for me, especially at this level. Their reading should be good enough. And just, again, focus on the basics, see if they understand the words, and ask them questions. If they have any questions, also try and answer them. The train words are the verbs that we're going to use throughout this lesson. These words I would usually read out loud, let them repeat after me, and then also as an extra, just ask them, what do they think the past tense verb for this would be? Just to kind of get the ideas flowing, see what their level is at, and make sure to just ask them one more time, what does what does stay mean, for example. Now you can use this by using the TPR trick number 1 to say, can you act out the word work? And then they do whatever action they can to describe work, and then act out the word stay. And this is a nice way to also just connect movement to the words. The next part of the lesson is the most important, of course. This is where I would explain the grammar rule, make sure they understand it. At this stage, especially a word that I found is something that you can focus on is indefinite time. Make sure that they understand what that means, and also just the rule of saying has and have, and adding the past participle of the verb. So I would go through this. Should be quite familiar if they have had previous experience with English Gang. If not, just remind them again of when to use has or have. Has would be with the pronoun subjects he, she, it, or singular subjects. And then for plural subjects or pronoun subjects you, I, they, we will use the pronoun, we will use the have instead of has. So yes, I would usually ask my student to just read through this. Remember to use the past participle, and then in this lesson we will use the present perfect tense to talk about money. Booster time is our practice round. So ask the student to read the sentence and then choose one of the words underneath. I would also practice pronunciation here and make sure that they understand the meaning of the sentence. In this module, they've got some lovely rewards on the side. You're welcome to use them as a motivator to say, well done, you got a booster reward. The next part would be the same. Because the lesson material is a bit more advanced, what I would usually do is just mainly focus on pronunciation here and make sure that they have the correct verb as you ask them to read the sentence. The next slide is to choose between A and B. Encourage your students to read both A and B, even though they might know the answer. And every now and then ask them, why did you use has instead of have? And just encourage them to repeat the rule that you've discussed in the beginning of the lesson. So again, just encourage conversation, expand on the question a bit more if you need to. This part is the dialogue practice part of the lesson. You'll see the sentences get a bit longer. So if you see that your student seems a bit overwhelmed, maybe try to read one sentence and then let them repeat one after you. And also just pay attention to the tone of voice and try and read it as clear as possible for the student. So I will read first, ask my student to repeat after me, and then we'll swap the roles. Same would be on this slide. It's important to also pay attention to the underlined part or the underlined sentence, and just focus the attention on the subject-verb agreement and using has or have, as well as the past participle. So usually there would be a few words here that students would need to repeat after you to practice pronunciation, and also make sure that they are reading each word clearly and understand what they are reading. So lastly, we'll have a conversation practice part of the lesson. The tutor will ask a question, and it's also important at this stage to have a free conversation using the sentences as guide, but gear it towards your students' interests. Maybe ask them how their day was, and then focus building on a practice using that information. So at this stage, I would try to use another TPR before the end of the lesson, just to refresh all the information and to make sure that that you are working on time, that you're not going ahead, going over the time. And yes, sometimes at the end of the module, you'll find an extra challenge. If there's no extra challenge, try to just continue the conversation until the end of the lesson, or try one of the story prompts or the one sentence stories before the end of the lesson. So I hope you enjoyed this, and please feel free to ask any questions if you have, and try to use these TPR tips in your next lesson. I'm sure you and your students will enjoy it. Thank you for listening.